Welcome to the What's Your Deal podcast, where we discuss business acquisitions, investments, management, and exit strategies. I'm your host, Matt Euler. Let's dive in. Welcome to another episode of What's Your Deal podcast. Today I'm joined with Luke McCarthy, a gentleman that I've known now for a little over a year and thoroughly enjoy as a person and am fascinated by as a business person. So I'm grateful to have him on the show today. Luke, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So part of what I find so fascinating about your history is you have a very extensive history in real estate. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you started in 2007 when you were 27 years old, and you had got into the business with a partner fixing and flipping homes.
Yep.
Roughly 1,000 of them before you transitioned out of that. And I think that's fascinating all on its own. But the other thing I think is fascinating is the 2007, 8, 9, and 10 were not economically, they were challenging times. And so to dive into that world, even though there was probably lots of inventory, it's an interesting story. Yeah. So maybe if you can just give us a little bit of your background, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah. So we started a real estate investment company actually in 2006.
Okay.
With the goal of buying distressed real estate. And it took about 2 years. You know, we kind of had a thesis that the market was going to crash at some point.
Interesting.
And it took us about 2 years before the market started showing some cracks. And so end of '07, we ended up buying our first property. It was basically a full 18 months before we saw those cracks in the market. Bought our first property, and then, you know, kind of from the end of '07 through really 2019, 2020, we just went on a buying spree. And, you know, we were the guys at the courthouse steps that were there bidding at the auctions. And, you know, we just had a great team. I had a business partner, a great team around us, and we loved it.
Yeah, that's great. And so were these mostly residential properties or commercial properties or both? And
yeah, at the auctions, it was mostly residential,
Okay.
Some commercial. What I tell people is we bought and flipped so that we could buy and hold. So,
interesting.
You know, we took the profits from the flipping and bought as many rental properties as we could. And those rentals were typically 2 and 4 unit, 8 unit properties. And then we kind of graduated into commercial properties from there.
And most of these were in California at the time?
Most in California.
Yeah.
You know, we started getting into buying mobile home parks and bought some mobile home parks out of state. But we were always California focused and specifically in Ventura County.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So that's a big span of time. A partner of mine and I were in fix and flip business for a while as well. And now we're in the hard money lending business. So we've kind of transitioned from that. But I'm trying to remember where we were operating. It was really 2-3 years that there was an opportunity for us here locally. But you had quite a span of time to be able to accumulate 1,000 plus flips in that period of time.
Yeah, you know, we always thought the window of opportunity was going to end. You know, when I started the business, I thought, okay, it's going to be, you know, really 2008, 9, and 10, and then the market's going to correct. It ended up being a lot more, you know, obviously a lot longer. The bulk of the opportunity we felt like was from that 2008 to 2015, 2016.
Okay.
And we really started pulling back after that, you know, taking some of our chips off the table.
Yeah.
You know, our big thing was being able to buy at or below the replacement cost of the property. We just felt like you couldn't go wrong if you were buying below what it cost to build that house. And that kind of flipped in 2015, 2016.
Okay.
And then there was a monetary premium on top of the cost of the construction. And as that premium got larger, which it's a lot larger today, you know, it just doesn't make as much sense to invest in real estate.
That's interesting because that's actually when we exited the fix and flip business, was because we couldn't we couldn't buy them for what we thought was going to make sense and to be able to flip them anymore.
Yeah.
And so your formula, and for our audience, I'm a big fan. Part of the reason I enjoy selling businesses so much and helping people with business acquisitions is because there's a formula in place.
Yep.
And that if the buyer can follow that formula, then their likelihood of success is much greater than with a startup. And so I'm always curious to hear people's formula. And your formula in that business of being able to buy them under cost to replace, that, especially in California, that's a tricky threshold, right? Because the market value, at least in my perception in that area, is so high that It would be easy to get above, for the market to climb above what it would cost to actually just replace it.
Right.
So, but were you able to stay true to that formula and, guiding principle the whole time you were in that business, or?
I mean, definitely through 2016, and it was, like you said, it was more of a guiding principle. It wasn't, we had other formulas, but that was always, worst case scenario, we just bought this home below replacement cost. We know over time that value is going to change. So it was a guiding principle.
Guiding principle, yeah. And so were some of the other principles that you might have been following, were there thresholds with how much you had to put into them to then be able to flip them? And was it cosmetic? Was it huge redesigns? I mean, maybe you can share some of what worked for you there.
I mean, it was kind of an evolving strategy. At the beginning, our focus was buying homes that didn't need a whole lot of repairs, because there were a lot of homes built in 2003, 4, and 5. And, they were getting foreclosed a couple of years later. So we were buying homes that were virtually new, just doing paint and carpet and putting them back on the market. As the market matured into the, 2015 range, then we started doing bigger fix and flips, and our formula was buying, we used ARV, after repaired value.
Okay.
And we'd try and buy at around 60% of the ARV.
Interesting.
Was our goal. So whatever our after repaired value was, less repairs, try and buy at 60% of that.
And so because of the niche that you were in, you probably didn't have catastrophic skeletons in the closet that were just like, oh my gosh, we didn't see this coming, or we should have never bought this home for that. I mean, it sounds like you were able to rinse and repeat pretty quick. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, doing that many properties, we definitely strayed from that. But pretty much every time we strayed, it wasn't as profitable as we thought.
Okay.
So a majority of them were rinse and repeat.
Yeah, that's great. And so from another thing that I'm very active in and also very intrigued by is partnerships. And obviously that partnership worked out great for you.
Yep.
Did you have clearly defined roles? How did that partnership develop and turn into what was a successful endeavor?
Sure. So that partner's Brian was my best friend since we were 3 years old.
Oh, wow.
But I ended up bringing him on. I started the business and then brought him on early on. We learned a lot about partnerships. I think we had a great partnership, but we also learned a lot. We didn't, now in our current businesses, we have much more clearly defined roles. At 26, I had no idea that we needed clearly defined roles. So we learned a lot, and I took that onto these future partnerships. But he and I are still partners on, all our real estate endeavors.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of who's become my best friend as well as a business partner in several endeavors. And we just have a great time.
Sweet.
And our values are so aligned that it's not a matter of exactly who's supposed to do what. We just do whatever we need to do because we care about each other, and we're more focused on us winning as a team than us winning individually or whatever. And that's worked with us. I haven't known him since he was 3, but that's a lot of history for you guys. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. We met in preschool.
Yeah.
So
that's amazing. So when it was time, the market was changing, is that what turned you out of that business when the market changed? Is that why you decided to look at other things, or what was the curve in the road that you decided to stop doing that and focus on other endeavors?
Yeah, I think a couple things. One, I was kind of getting bored, and we kept doing it. And again, we still do to a small degree, but I was getting a little bored with real estate. I could look at Google Maps and tell you exactly how much that repair job for that home was going to be. And it just wanted to do something different. And it was pretty automated. And I was fortunate enough, our first daughter was born in 2014. And so that was around the time I kind of started scaling back, was able to spend more time at home. The business was running pretty well. I was involved in the major decisions, but it kept running pretty well. So sorry, remind me the question again, though.
So it was just when it was time, there was the crossing the road where you decided you wanted to leave that business and move on to something else. So it sounds like boredom was a factor.
Yeah, boredom and just the risk. As that premium went up on real estate, we just didn't feel like the risk reward was there. Versus in 2008, 9, 10, to us, we felt it was virtually close to risk-free.
Especially with the formula you were following.
Exactly.
It'd be pretty hard to lose.
Exactly. We knew we could hold for long enough and with that formula, and, prices would come back.
So you had a specific target price or price range, or, were you dealing with entry-level homes or?
We did the whole thing.
The whole gamut?
Yeah, our focus was entry-level, but, we bought, $5,000 mobile homes, and we bought, $3 million homes in Montecito.
Wow.
So we had a pretty large range, but our focus was always entry level. Yeah.
Great. So then you transitioned into businesses, and part of what I think is so fascinating about that is there's lots of courses about people how to buy fix and flips, how to buy rentals, how to buy multifamily, how to bank, all these aspects of real estate. But when it comes to businesses, there isn't so much. And so you decided to veer more from real estate, even though you still do that, but get into some business acquisitions. So maybe you can walk us through that, and then I'll give the audience how we met, because I think that's kind of fun as well. But where did you start with your first business, and what did that look like, and how did that turn out?
Yeah, so we bought a property in May of 2020 that we wanted to buy for future development. It was kind of in the path of development in Southern California. It had a couple houses on it. It was on a couple acres, and we thought it was a good long-term buy. And there happened to be a dog hotel as one of the tenants on the property. And we were willing to pay the price, just for the property itself, and we ended up getting the dog hotel for free. Well, dog hotels in May of 2020 were not great businesses because no one was traveling. So anyway, we bought it, and then brought in my younger brother as the majority owner of the dog hotel to operate it. And I don't know, 6 months to a year later, people started traveling, and my brother was able to turn that business around, and it kind of made us go, wow. I'd never looked at owning businesses prior. I thought it seemed, it was out of what I wanted to do. I just wanted to buy real estate. But with the boredom and the premium on real estate, and then seeing what the dog business was able to do, it kind of opened my eyes to, looking at other ventures. So that was the start.
Okay. And then I think you, just prior to us meeting, I think you purchased another dog-related business as well.
Yep.
With partners, yeah.
Correct, yeah. So Keith Skolarski and I own two dog hotels here in the Prescott region. He ended up buying the first one on his own. And, he and I were in constant communication because I had the one in California, and that kind of, I think, helped get him over the hump of buying this one in town. And then I don't know, maybe a year later, another opportunity came up for another dog hotel. So he and I ended up going in on that together. And then ultimately ended up merging them into, our holding company that we've got today.
I see. And did you and Keith know each other prior to, you'd been friends, I guess, or how?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. We've been friends, loosely family.
That's great.
Yeah.
So then that's around the time that I got a call. I think it was either you or Keith that called and said got my name from somebody and you were interested in finding a business here locally that you guys could buy and add to your portfolio.
Yep. And
so we met and, right off the bat, I enjoyed talking with you guys because of your background and who you were and what you stood for. But at the time, correct me if I'm wrong, you were looking at actually buying a landscape business in a couple hours away in a whole nother city.
Yeah.
And as you were telling me that, I was working on listing a landscape business here locally that really I thought was one of the nicest I had ever seen.
Yeah.
And so as a broker, I was in that position of, wow, I might have a good fit here right off the bat.
Yeah.
And so as it turned out, that business never went on the market because it turned out to be a good fit for you and it's something that you both pursued and ended up buying. So maybe you can share with us a little bit about that transaction. And again, you don't need to provide any specific details, but what did you learn? What would you have done different if you had the chance to do it again? What are you grateful for that came out of that transaction? So what did you like about it in the first place? Maybe some of those things you can share.
Sure. Yeah, I think what we were really looking for was recurring revenue. In this kind of market environment, we just felt like recurring revenue that, is not as at risk of market changes. And, we felt like commercial landscape maintenance would be a great spot because I don't, in whatever happens in the market, I don't see homeowners associations reducing their dues and reducing the maintenance that these communities require. So the recurring revenue though was really important, and so we really honed in on the landscape side, specifically the commercial side.
Yeah, and the maintenance as opposed to install.
Correct.
So even though I know you do some install, but the backbone of that business is maintenance and reoccurring customers and relationships and.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we loved that aspect of the business. And, the next step was really getting to know the owner. And we felt like the owner was a great guy, trustworthy, and we got to golf with him before closing on that deal, which I love doing because you get to spend, 4 hours with someone and see how, you can learn a lot about someone in that 4 hours.
And whether they're a golfer or not.
Yeah, exactly. And he's a good golfer. He's a good golfer. And so, the one thing that we pushed for but weren't able to accomplish was, we love to get to know at least the management team. And I know most sellers don't want that. And I totally understand why, but, so we weren't able to meet the management team, but we've been, extremely pleasantly surprised, have not let go of any key employees. All of them have been, superstars, especially our general manager, who's been there, I forget, 14 years, I think.
Wow.
So, we really lucked out in that regard. And as far as other things that we've learned, probably should have done more due diligence on older vehicles.
So rolling stock, hard assets.
Yeah. I mean, we paid what they appraised for and what the seller thought they were worth. But, it ended up, we've had to replace a lot of vehicles.
Oh, okay.
So, and I don't think the seller would have changed his mind even if we said, they're worth half of what you're saying they're worth.
Well, and it's a funny thing you bring that up because I see that a lot where oftentimes the business owner who's been running it, in that case, for a long, long time, they work for them and they've got their own recipe and system for following when they're going to replace vehicles and when they won't and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's actually, it's a common thing I hear from people who buy businesses is that the assets were more run down than they wanted or that kind of thing. I participated as a partner in a transaction where we bought an excavation company and we still own it to this day. But the joke was all of that equipment was just, I mean, they were one of the many excavators that we purchased had one tooth left. And so the crew used to call it Frankenstein. It's just this one-toothed excavator. It was all, so we've pretty much replaced every single piece of equipment over a 3-year period of time. Yeah. Fortunately, we knew that going in, but it's a heavy lift. I mean, it gets expensive, and I'm sure with the fleet that you acquired, that gets expensive for what you purchased as well.
Yeah, roughly 50 vehicles. And a lot of them were 2008 to 2012. So yeah, I think we've replaced, I don't know, roughly around 15 so far. Actually, probably more like 20 so far. We kind of we knew we were going to replace them. So it just sped up that process a little bit and been a little more capital intensive than we expected. But
well, let me ask you about that real quick, because I know a lot of times business owners don't want to provide real high quality vehicles to workers, and especially in certain industries, because they're afraid they're just going to get trashed anyway. Have you found that the staff have appreciated the quality of the new vehicles that you've provided and are maintaining them that way, or are they just getting hammered on and destroyed? Yeah,
the guys that do hammer on and destroy the vehicles or smoke in the vehicle, they don't get new vehicles.
Okay.
It's the guys that have earned it, that both have earned it and take care of their vehicle. So, we found those guys are taking care of their vehicles, and it's kind of like a pay raise for them when they get to drive a nice new vehicle.
Yeah, so I love that, and I just want to point it out for our audience. Back to the recipe. So as you're talking, your recipes are jumping out at me. A lot of people, it's like, okay, Crew 7, their truck's junk. They need a new one. But your recipe, as I'm understanding it, is if Crew 7 isn't taking care of their truck, they're not getting a new one.
Yep.
You're actually rewarding and incentivizing the people who are taking care of the assets that you're acquiring through use of that asset, which is, again, a formula to me that makes sense as opposed to just the one that needs it the most gets it.
Right.
So I love that. It's a great distinction.
Yeah. And again, the guys look at it like a reward or a pay raise.
Absolutely.
Because they've been driving old vehicles for a long time, and a lot of them have really earned the right to drive a nicer, newer vehicle. So, and they take more pride in the company when they're driving a new vehicle as well.
Well, and the public perception and all of that. So, I mean, it's multifold. It's just...
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you had mentioned about wishing you had been able to, and that was part of your formula, I guess, was to try to meet key staff beforehand. As a broker who've closed a lot of transactions, I've learned through many of them that it's almost always better that nobody knows until we know it's going to close.
Right.
But that does create some uncomfortableness. And there's an example of one I shared in another episode where the closing got delayed so long by a third-party provider that the seller introduced the buyer to all the staff and let the pending transaction be known. And then several and one very key employee were being approached by other competitors. So it's funny, a lot of times buyers will often think that they just, I need to meet the people, and what's the problem? What's the secret? And the reality is, in my experience, that oftentimes the employees of the business are not in the know about what's happening. And so the fear of the unknown takes them over, and then they start looking to switch. And I appreciate why it's so helpful for the buyer to have that connection, because in that example, and I think knowing you and Keith as well as I do, it'd be hard for the key employee to not like you guys. But had he chose to move on, or if he was already in the process of wanting to move on or something, that could have been devastating for you.
Right. Yeah. It absolutely could. And it's really tough, right? Because at the end of the day, the business is the people. And
great point.
When you can't do you can do as much research as you can, but if you can't meet the people, then you're relying on, at the end of the day, the seller's word on how those key people are. And so, again, I think we were really fortunate that we got a bunch of great guys. We've definitely let go of some bad people, but again, no key people. And that's given us a good spot to be able to build the business from.
Yeah, well, and in that business, my guess is even if you hadn't bought it, the previous owner would have let go of a handful of people as well. I mean, it's just that when you're dealing with, how many employees do you have roughly now?
Roughly 45.
Yeah, so that's a lot of people and personalities and spouses and, everything that goes along with trying to be the employer of them. So,
yeah, in the landscape maintenance business, it can be seasonal. So, there's always turnover, especially, when winter starts.
Yeah, one of the other things I appreciate about the business that you bought and your intent when we first met was, if I remember correctly, you wanted something that was part of the community, contributed to the community. And I think that's what you received. But what does that mean to you when you had said that? I mean, what does being part of the community in a business, as a business owner, what's that mean to you?
Sure. Yeah, I think, our thesis with our holding company is that, small business is the backbone of communities. And we've seen, coming from Southern California, we've kind of seen how, not that I'm against bigger businesses coming in, but we've seen what happens when private equity and bigger businesses come in and kind of take over. And the community, starts losing that community feel. It's natural as communities grow, but we just felt like with this holding company, we want to keep it local, in the Prescott region and Prescott and Northern Arizona region. And, we feel like that's kind of part of our way of giving back to this community that we love is, buying businesses here locally and in turn supporting our employees and our, employing people in the local community. We just feel like is a very important thing.
That's great. So, well, and there's a value system that comes along with that I think fits the community you're in as well. I mean,
right.
People honor that where you are, which is great. So
absolutely.
So now you are part owner of 4 or 5 businesses and a real estate company. Are you still bored?
No, I'm not bored. I was probably a little bored before we bought the 4 businesses here. But it definitely keeps me busy.
That's great.
So between that and 4 young kids.
I'm sure. Yeah, there's a lot. And that's one that I'd like to transition into that.
Yeah.
So you've obviously been successful and can probably choose what it is you want to do. What's next for you? I mean, what excites you? What gets you out of bed in the morning? What do you hope to accomplish or want to accomplish in the future? Next 12 months, 24 months?
Yeah. I think right now we're fully focused on our 4 businesses here. We think our landscape maintenance business, our commercial landscape maintenance business, and our pest control business have a ton of room for growth. So we're going to continue to focus on those. And, I'm stepping a little bit out of the day-to-day as of January on those businesses so I can kind of focus at a higher level. And then, so I'm going to start looking again, calling you about maybe finding the next business to buy.
Okay. And so is it just to buy another business, or does it fit a piece in what you're trying to accomplish? I mean, what's the end game?
I mean, what we're trying to accomplish is to, continue to support this community by finding great family-owned businesses where the owners want to retire, or they want to get ready to retire and maybe sell a part of their business, or maybe just invest in their business if they're looking for a passive investor. So we're just going to continue to pursue that and focus on it locally. And
another distinction I heard, family-owned business. So what is it about a family-owned business that's attractive to you as a buyer of a business or an investor?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just typically means the whole family's been involved. You find that they've cared for the business a lot over the years. It doesn't have to be family-owned, but we've noticed that there are a lot of family-owned businesses here, and the owners have done a phenomenal job of growing the business over the last 10, 20 years. And they're kind of at that age, 50s, 60s, 70s, where they're looking to monetize that business. Mm-hmm. And so we feel like we can kind of fill that need.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So another thing that I've appreciated about you, I've spent a lot of time with lots of business people and have been one myself for 30 plus years, and balancing family and personal life and business, especially for what I've heard is referred as serial entrepreneurs, can't ever get enough. It's not easy. And for a lot of business people, it means compromising their children, compromising their spouse, divorces, a lot of struggle.
Yeah.
Because they're so driven and so focused on business activity. And when we had lunch last, you shared with me that, again, part of the recipe, this is my term, but I keep extracting these things as I hear them, is that you will not get into a deal that you think is going to lose you sleep. And what a fascinating and admirable principle. And so can you share a little bit about that and how you've been able to accomplish as much as you have at a very young age for as much as you've accomplished, and been able to keep your family intact and your priorities straight and your you time on track? Sure. Yeah, sure. It's rare from most of the business people I see.
I mean, I think it's a constant struggle, and it involves a lot of communication with my wife, which I'm slowly getting better at. But, definitely, naturally, I'm more inclined to put in 80 hours a week at work. Kids change that. And so now it's just about finding that balance, which is really hard to do at acquisition time. The due diligence leading up to acquisition and the first year after acquisition are tough. So, my wife and I just communicate a lot to make sure that we're both getting, our needs and the kids' needs met. But it's a constant, we're constantly juggling that. So,
well, that's great. You mentioned that kids change things. I have seen, unfortunately, that oftentimes kids don't change things for some people. So my hat's off to you for honoring that and just noticing that. I mean, a lot of people just go blazing right past the kids or the kids or the wife's job or the whatever, and they just, it's the next hunt and the next chase. And I understand and fully appreciate how exciting that is. But I also appreciate, I have 4 kids as well. The brightest parts of my day are the moments with them when I get to connect with that being who's looking for guidance and leadership and all of that. And then the family time that we get to spend is just, I wouldn't, if I had to make a choice right now, business or family, I would choose family.
Yeah.
Because because I've learned the hard way sometimes as well, and I've seen it, and I've been able to see it in other people, that it's just, it's at the end of the day, more is necessarily not what it's all cracked up to be. And there's a fine balance there. So
absolutely.
So I've appreciated that about you since we met, that you have found that balance and continue to work to maintain that balance.
Yeah. It's constant work to maintain it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's all worth it.
Great. So one other question I have for you is, it's easy for people to watch podcasts like this and think that, the grass is always greener or it was easier, that they can't accomplish something like what you've been able to accomplish. And what I believe and have found to be true is that nobody makes it on their own. There's already somebody that gives them a hand up or, helps them along their way. And I've certainly had lots and lots of those people that have helped me along the way and still do. But I'd be curious if you could share with our audience, who helped you along the way? What are some of the people that made the biggest difference in your life and being able to get you where you are and to be clear about who you are as well?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's been a ton of great people. If I had to hone in on one that really changed the trajectory of, my career, it was a gentleman by the name of Bruce Norris, who's a real estate investor in Southern California. And, he happened to write a book called The California Crash.
Interesting.
And in 2005. And a friend invited me to a real estate seminar that he was speaking at, and they had a raffle. And I call it a book, but it was more of a class, a big, thick book full of charts and graphs on how and why the market was going to crash.
Wow. And
they had this raffle, there was 30 people in the room, and I ended up winning the book. I would have never had the money because I think it was a $1,400 class. And I ended up winning it, and I took that as a sign that, I've got to study this book front to back to really learn what's going to happen in the market. He didn't lay out when it was going to happen because no one knows when the market was going to crash, but he laid out how and why it ultimately would. And, so that, and I got to know him over the years, not super well, but that was the thing that changed, the trajectory of my career the most.
That's interesting. So he stood out to you. It was a turning point, I guess. His influence and what he brought to the table.
Yeah. And he wasn't a doom and gloom guy. He was an active real estate investor that planned on buying more real estate, but he really, laid out in this book what was going to happen ultimately, and that there were going to be a lot of buying opportunities once the market crashed.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it worked out.
It worked out great. Yeah.
That's great.
No complaints.
Well, I know Keith as well, and so I'd love to have you both on at some point in the future to talk about partnerships and how you collaborate. I've enjoyed knowing you both and watching how you work together, and from the outside, and I believe it's true, just really enjoy each other's company and what each brings to the table, and so I think there's a lot to learn about that relationship. And if you're willing to come back and share that, we would sure appreciate that.
We'd love to.
Yeah.
Or if we find a deal that we're doing due diligence on, I'd love to come talk to you about it.
That'd be great. I appreciate you bringing that up. One of the things that we're promoting through Amped is that I've been analyzing deals for 30 years,
right.
And am welcoming people to present their deals to me for me to analyze here on the show and work our way through it, pull it apart and see what we think. And not that I see everything there is, but I've certainly been doing it a long time. So if you come up with a deal that you think's exciting, let's pull it apart and see what's on the other side.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us. That's a wrap for today. I hope you've gained enormous knowledge from all of the recipes that Luke's been willing to share with us. And I hope it also motivates you about what's possible. Luke is one of the most humble people I know, and it's just I consider him a great friend, and it's a real honor to have him with us here today on What's Your Deal? See you next time. And that's a wrap on today's episode. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and got some valuable insights into the world of buying and selling businesses. Want to be a guest on our show? If you have a deal that you'd like to discuss with us or a business story to share, we'd love to hear from you. Shoot us an email using the contact information below in the episode notes, and let's make this happen. Never miss an episode. Make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And if you found today's episode helpful, please leave us a review. It helps more people like you find the show.